This is the Fantasy Ladder Podcast, episode 12. I'm your host, Steve, at Fantasy Ladder. This podcast is brought to you by the IDP Guys Podcast Network from idpguys.org. So, welcome back once again, my fantasy football friends and family. Let's climb the ladder of fantasy football together. So, we are continuing our fan base series, which, again, if you have been listening so far, you know the drill. But if this is your first time listening, welcome. But what we are doing in this series is bringing on some of my favorite people from the fantasy football community to discuss their favorite teams because I may not be as involved or as plugged into the team or the history of the team. So I want to get their perspective on it because I don't know it potentially as well as my own favorite team, which of course is the Eagles. But today we are going to be covering the Carolina Panthers with my friend Josiah. Josiah, how you doing?
Hey, Steve. I'm doing good, man. It's great to see you again.
Awesome. Yeah. So Josiah is my first repeat guest. He is one half of at Fantasy Gazette. So awesome work that they're doing over there, really breaking up the Twitter experience from some of the hot takes and some of the garbage, and just always there for a good laugh or a good just escape from all that madness. So yeah. So I just want to know how you're doing, and also how long have you been a Panthers fan?
I appreciate that, Steve. It's an exciting time in my life. My wife and I welcomed our first kid into the world about 5 weeks ago, so we've got a daughter now. So that's my life since the last time we talked. But yeah, so that's a little bit of me. So the Panthers fandom really started when I was a kid. That '03 team, Jake Delhomme, Steve Smith. I think Deshaun Foster was on that team. Like, man, just as a kid, they roped me in. I loved the team. Loved the color scheme. Like, little 8-year-old me thought that was like the coolest thing ever. I had to get in on that. So I'm from Kansas, and like everybody's a Chiefs fan up here, and I just kind of felt like I maybe needed my own thing. So that led me to Carolina. Followed them my whole life. It's been a lot of pain, a few good times here and there,
Yeah, of course.
but overall pain. So yeah, looking forward to talking shop about the team today for sure.
Gotcha, gotcha. So with you being out of market, like out of like TV market, how do you go about watching your Panthers? Do you need to get like the special like TV package or what's that like?
Yeah, it's basically either paying for Red Zone or paying for Sunday Ticket. If I don't have them, if I'm not on any accounts with anybody, like I've done that in past years. If I don't have it, I probably don't get to watch their games. So it's caused me to miss quite a few games over the years. But of course, I'm always following highlights if I'm not able to see the full game. But it's definitely a challenge.
Right. Yeah. So you did mention the word pain. So maybe if you can't watch it, maybe that may be better in the long run. I don't know. And also,
Yeah.
just wanted to wish you a congratulations to you and your wife. It's a very exciting time to have the little kiddo. So best of luck with that. The dad life is a good life, but it's also a very challenging one. But it's great. So very happy for you guys.
For sure. Thanks, man.
Yeah, so just rolling into the episode here, just wanted to summarize the 2021 season, and then we'll talk our way through the off season and then look ahead to the 2022 season that we have in front of us here. And it's interesting because the way we've looked at this off season for the Panthers has really been split into two parts: pre and post Baker Mayfield. But we will get to that in just a bit. So that's a little teaser for what's coming up later. But 2021 season summary, okay? They finished the season last in the NFC South, 5-12, after starting 3-0. So it was a very uh, great start to the season for them. They unfortunately did miss the playoffs with the 5-12 record, the fourth straight year of that. And all of a sudden, there are a lot of questions surrounding the recently sought after head coach candidate, Matt Rule. Now, from a fantasy perspective, the season was summarized by Sam Darnold's 4-game hot streak, and then all of a sudden, magical, like vanishing act, as well as Christian McCaffrey's injury, where he missed 5.5 games. Then reappeared for 4 consecutive games, but never returned after the Week 13 bye week. But going back to the game where he did get injured, it was one of the more like just tilting fantasy football experiences because it was a Thursday night game. against the Texans. So it's like short week of practice. That
Yep.
means that the running backs are going to get more touches, and the Texans. So even
Yes.
more running back usage, and it wasn't like he wasn't getting touches in that game. He was getting the normal McCaffrey experience. And then early in the second quarter, I think it was his hamstring.
Yeah, I
And
believe
they were deep in the red zone at that point. I think they were on like the 12-yard line or something. So you're just getting ready for that early game like touchdown potential. Just awful. So just for fantasy managers across I guess the globe, but also Carolina fans, that was a real
sure.
brutal one. So with this strange sort of season that started really strong and then got bad, very quickly. Do you think that head coach Matt Rule is now on the hot seat after 2 straight seasons of just 5 wins?
Yeah, I mean the NFL is a cutthroat business, man. It's brutal. You see teams that rotate coaches all the time. I feel like a coach would be even lucky to get 2 seasons. One that is unproven. So Matt Rule coming out of college, I feel like even the fact that he's made it 2 full seasons shows that the team early on made a real commitment to him. You go back to that 3-0 start. That was a little boosted by a pretty soft schedule to start the year. We opened with the Jets. Beat the Saints and then the Texans on that Thursday night game you're talking about. So even the highest expectation fans, we saw Jets, Saints, Houston, and we're like, well, that's 2-1 at worst. So I don't think you can necessarily shift full blame onto Matt Rule for that. So I do want to see him get another shot here. The thing about Matt Rule is, if you remember when they brought him in, he was fresh off of turning around the Baylor program. From coming off of a bunch of scandals and just horrible records, and no one wanted anything to do with him, and he turned him into a contender. Did the same thing at Temple previously. So Matt Rule's the thing he was known for was that he was able to come in and turn around programs. And if you want to have that kind of commitment to a guy that can do that, you have to give him time. So I'm happy to see that they stuck with him for this long and to kind of say, okay, this is your thing. You need probably at least 3 years to do this. He was at Temple for at least 3. He was at Baylor for at least 3. So I'm glad that we're not just rotating coaches and, hey, the team sucks, the free agent signings suck, the draft didn't go well, let's fire the head coach and that'll get better. You can't necessarily do that. So I'm happy to see them commit to him and stick with it. But I think for most head coaches, you'd be lucky to get 3 years in Rule situations. So I think by default, he's on the hot seat because, if it doesn't happen this quickly in the NFL, you got to bring in someone who can get it done in that time frame.
Yeah, absolutely. So because he was a head coach at Temple, like I'm out from outside of Philadelphia, so the
Yeah,
local Philadelphia media was very excited for him. Very happy to just he's getting the opportunity and stuff. But yeah, so I wish him well because I do remember that turnaround at Baylor because that is like a big jump from Temple
it
to
is.
like to a Big 12 program, and I mean they were like suspended, that they were hit with sanctions, and then they were
Yep.
like back in a bowl game after he was only there for like 2 seasons or something, which was just
Right.
like it was fantastic. So a very easy guy to root for. Now I don't watch a ton of Panthers games, so I don't actually see a lot of the what Matt Rule is doing like in the game, like how is he handling the adjustments at halftime and this sort of thing. So from what you've seen and what you've read, what improvements do you want to see out of Rule in 2022, and what can he show you or the fan base or the general team, etc., to keep him off of that hot seat? Like what would be the sticking point that you think, oh, he deserves year 4?
Yeah, man, that's a great question. There's a lot of factors that go into that. I mean, Rule's been here for a couple of years, and he hasn't had McCaffrey for more than, oh gosh, is it 6 games? 7 games, or it's less than 10 that I think McCaffrey's played for the last couple of years. So you miss a huge focal part of the offense like that, and it's hard to say that he could fully reach his potential. But I think we do want to see him have the ability to adjust when things do go wrong. And the consistency, I think the team is ready to see, the fan base is ready to see a little more consistency out of the team. We saw Darnold erupt. Like I mentioned earlier, they were playing some kind of soft competition, but he looked really good. And even the fourth game of season against Dallas, he put up some really solid stats as well. Ran in a couple of touchdowns in that game too, and then all of a sudden it just disappeared. So I think a little bit of consistency is going to go a long way. You look back even to the Cam Newton years. Carolina fans are desperate for some consistency, and I guess we only won 5 games 2 years in a row. So that's consistency, but we want to see some winning consistency somewhere in that 500 and above range. The all defensive draft class in 2020 seems to be working out pretty well. The young defense is really exciting. That's a great building block to start with if you're going into a rebuild. Really build up that defense, add in some of those offensive pieces later. So you're kind of seeing the long-term play of Rule's regime start to work out a little bit. So I know Panthers fans and the front office too, I think they're looking for Rule to kind of control the narrative a little bit more. I think they want to see him just kind of remind people, you're a Philly guy, trust the process. That's what we started with. We're trusting the process with Rule. From an X's and O's perspective, I don't really have much there for you. I know losing McCaffrey was brutal to everything in X's and O's format. So, I'm not quite there in the huddle with him in the locker room. I'd love to see a little bit more creativity in the play calling, for sure, just to kind of get a few more people involved and utilize DJ Moore to a fuller extent. I know myself, fantasy managers everywhere, we want to see him a little more involved in that red zone. So that's a bit on the offensive side, but the young defensive core that we've built is doing great. So this year, if we can take our defense and really turn it into a top 10 unit, I think that'll buy Matt Rule a 4th year, assuming the offense kind of stays with it, because people are going to start to see, okay, this is the process. It's long-term and it's really starting to build and get better. And that was always going to be Matt Rule's thing, was each year it's going to get better. It's going to get noticeably better. We're all going to see that it's happening. The process is working. And I think that's what buys him year 4.
Yeah. I love that answer, because it really is a difficult one to answer, like for me and the Eagles. What I was very skeptical of with Nick Sirianni in his first season last year as head coach was it just took him a really long time to get a grasp of the offense's potential.
Right.
Then about halfway through the season, did they really caught on, and they were very successful, especially like with the running game that opened things up for Hurts passing and everything else. So I just want to see that continue. Right now with someone like Rule, you meant the very first thing you said was that the NFL is unfortunately results oriented, right?
Yeah.
A head coach that I can kind of see in the same path as Matt Rule was like Zach Taylor of the Bengals.
Oh, sure.
So they had all this good young talent and then just didn't have the wins because, Burrow got hurt as a rookie. And then the year before, oh God, I can't even tell you who was the quarterback. Was it Andy Dalton? I don't even know, but
yeah, I think so.
But it looked pretty brutal, right? Like the Bengals, like the laughing stock of the NFL. And then this year, it all comes together. They had these pieces on defense. They had these pieces on offense, Mixon and everything. It all worked out. And I think it was still a surprise that they made it to the Super Bowl, but it was a fantastic season. So I think that really bought him probably a couple years, right?
Sure.
So I think Rule, that may be what it takes, but if he doesn't get beyond, 7 wins, 8 wins, it may be hard for the team to bring it back, unfortunately, so I'm very intrigued. I completely agree that was in my notes for a little bit later on, that the core of their defense is, I think, really promising and especially very young. You got Jeremy Chin, you got Brian Burns, you got Derek Brown, J.C. Horn, a lot of great pieces
bringing
there.
Horn back. That'll be huge.
Yeah, absolutely. Because did he suffer an injury last year?
Broken foot.
Broken foot. Yeah. So when you lose your first round cornerback and Christian McCaffrey, the whole X's and O's of everything is like, well, let's just try not to die. You know what I mean? So it's
right.
It's really unfortunate.
Let's try to at least score 2 touchdowns and
not
feel too bad about this. Yeah.
Gotcha. So now we're gonna summarize their free agency from this offseason. So some of the losses, outside linebacker Hassan Reddick, he's getting I would say he's still in his prime. but they did
Sure.
not
Yeah.
they did not retain him. Definitely a productive player in terms of sacks. So like the Philadelphia Eagles, fortunately, were able to
Yeah.
sign him.
That was a
So he
good
gets
pickup
a
for you.
yeah, I would think so too. So he gets a little homecoming again. He was one of those Temple guys, under Rule actually. So that was pretty neat. And then they did not retain Stephon Gilmore. This was a really interesting one because in that hot streak that the Panthers were on, they acquired him for a 2023 sixth rounder
Right.
from the Patriots. To me, it was like this is crazy. Like any team would do that deal.
Right. Yeah.
And then you got Horn on one side, Gilmore on the other. Like that's pretty sick. You know what I mean? But then
Yeah.
it all just went downhill. I'm not even sure if Gilmore has signed with a team yet. So if you
He's with
know
the
that,
Colts.
well, there you go.
Yep.
Okay, that's a good fit then.
Yeah, 2-year deal.
Perfect. Okay. Yeah. So I think that's a good fit for him at this stage of his career. But either way, the Panthers, unfortunately, did not retain him. Now they did bring on, most notably, quarterback Baker Mayfield, offensive guard Austin Corbett from the Los Angeles Rams, and that can typically happen, right? Like the teams who win a Super Bowl, they can't retain every player because now
Right.
every player it just naturally is going to become more expensive to retain because they got that nice thing on their resume.
Yep.
They did
Exactly.
bring
Happens
in
all the time.
it happened with the Eagles back in 2018. Like role players were getting like starter contracts. It just was interesting.
Yeah.
But
We lost
uh,
AJ Klein that way a few years ago. That one hurt.
gotcha.
Yeah.
He went in division to the Saints,
He
right?
went to the Saints. It was after that
Yeah.
Super Bowl run. He was a incredibly underrated linebacker. He was great. I think he was due up for a contract anyway, but the timing of it was definitely, hey, you were on a really legitimate unit here. You're worth a lot more now. There's more eyes on you. People are just going to see that. So, yeah,
Yep.
Klein was that way, and Corbett is going to be that.
Yep. For
He's
sure.
part of that as well.
Yeah. And then they also brought in center Bradley Bozeman from the Ravens. And then one of the signings that really did raise my eyebrows in a serious way was punter Johnny Hecker, who really is a fantastic punter.
Oh,
If
he's
you have to
great.
have, oh, he's amazing. When Bill Belichick is like singing your praises, like that's really saying something. So, it is a very exciting ad there. People think, oh, it's just a punter, just kick the ball, but he's fantastic. If there was a cheat code at that position, it's him,
Yeah,
right?
he
So
was a Ram also too, right? Am I remembering that correctly?
that's right. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yep.
yeah. So brought in a couple of Rams. Yeah, Hecker is. Oh, I mean, he was a surprise ad for me. I'm still a little bit surprised the Rams didn't retain him or continue doing what was working there. I don't know if it was a financial thing or I don't know what it was, but yeah, Hecker will be a nice ad. I hope we're not punting too much, but we might. So it might be pretty helpful.
Yeah, it's really a phase of the game that often gets overlooked in the fantasy football realm, right?
Of course. Yep.
But actual what happens in the game, a big phase of it is special teams. You think, oh, well, the ball's just gonna go back through the end zone and everyone's just going to run through and flex at the fans or whatever, but like
Yeah.
it is a really big deal if you have like a really solid punter or a really bad punter. I mean that, yeah, it's quite the experience there, but one that's often overlooked in the fantasy realm,
For
for
sure.
sure. So just want to get your general thoughts on the moves. um as a fan, are you excited for Baker Mayfield? Like what was your reaction to that?
Yeah. So with Baker, I mean, as soon as the news hit, I got a bunch of texts and calls. Everyone wanted to kind of see how it felt from a fan's perspective. The ad happens anytime there's a big signing or trade. Something big happens with the Cowboys, I got to text my Cowboys fan, my buddy. So yeah, with Baker, what I said to everybody that asked me, I said it's never a bad day to upgrade at quarterback. It's never a bad day to do that. And only in the rarest of cases are you saying, okay, let's just not even touch the position and get better. But Baker's he's a good quarterback. I mean, it's not like he is terrible. It's not like he can't throw accurately. He's a solid quarterback. I think he's an upgrade from Darnold. He's going to be able to help bridge that gap. He's a unrestricted free agent after the season, so this is kind of a 1-year trial run with him. never a bad day to upgrade at quarterback. Our team's possibly getting better this way. If he performs well and is up to the task, he could potentially even stay around if our pick might not land us one of those top quarterbacks in the next draft. That's something to look at as well. With Baker, I think too he's a good personality fit in Carolina. Namely, he needs kind of a second chance. Carolina's in need of a second chance. I think I speak for all the fan base when I say we're still kind of in that post Cam Newton hangover a little bit, right?
Yeah.
Like he's kind of like the ex-boyfriend of the fan base. Like we miss him. He's kind of the one that it could have gone all the way, but it didn't really work out that well. He wasn't the one, and then we kind of brought him back for a little bit. Hit him up a second time. That didn't work out. That's kind of how it feels with Cam Newton. So Baker is kind of he needs a second chance, and we need a second chance as well. He brings a lot of personality and swag to the position. That's something that Panthers fans are used to. I think there's going to be a little bit of flashbacks of Cam Newton doing, celebrations in the end zone or flexing or just, yelling in the cameras, yelling to the fans after a big play. I think the fans are going to be familiar with that. So I think he fits in really well personality wise. I'm excited to see what happens this year with him.
I love that that correlation between Baker at his stage of his career and where the fan base is for the Panthers. Like it's kind of a perfect union if you think about it,
Right.
because the team is ready for that. And I think Baker is also ready for that. Like I can't think of like a more like disrespected quarterback from this offseason than Baker. It was such a weird happening well, I mean, he had like he had the shoulder surgery to his non-throwing arm. So he's
Right.
just is kind of in like rehab limbo there, which is not great for a player sake, and then they bring in Deshaun Watson, we're still figuring all that out. And then they also brought in Jacoby Brissett. So Baker's just like, okay, like, all right, So I think a lot of us really had our eyes on where he would go. Was it Seattle? Was it, wherever? So I think the Panthers is a great fit because they have such a nice core of talent. Christian McCaffrey, DJ Moore, obviously, even Terrace Marshall, who we'll touch on a little bit later.
Yeah.
I think because of that personality and because of that energy that he can bring, you just don't see that with Sam Darnold. He's just kind of like this. He's just quick to come off the field, and you don't need to have this big personality or anything, but you
Right.
definitely don't see it with him.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
don't need it either. But I think that can definitely rejuvenate the team and rejuvenate the fan base in a way with Baker that you just are not going to get with Darnold for sure.
Yeah, I agree with you completely there. I think the fans are going to really enjoy what Baker brings. It's what we're used to, and they'll like it. So, yeah, with Darnold, you just didn't see that confidence.
Right. Yeah. But it also just gives like a little extra like spark to DJ
Sure.
Moore, a little extra spark to Christian McCaffrey. You know what I mean? At least for me, it's like I don't know if it's like a mental thing or not, but it's like, oh, like I can kind of get a little bit more excited for them with it being Baker than Darnold for sure. But yeah, I mean, I think he'll be the undisputed starter. Week one as long as he's
Yeah.
healthy.
Right.
I saw some, and again, any kind of like news headline in like June and July, it's just very easy to just like disregard it. It was like, oh, they're gonna battle it out and all this stuff. I just don't think so. I think it's just gonna be Baker from day one. But
Yep.
if that makes Darnold play that much better, then that's a good problem for the
Sure.
team to have, right? But I think
Yeah.
if the team is wise, it's going to be Baker. But yeah, so I was very excited for that, and it seems like you and the rest of the fan base are too. So I think that's great.
Yeah, it's a quarterback upgrade. It's hard to complain about that. And the other thing I wanted to bring up with Baker before I forgot is, he comes from a run first system in Cleveland.
Yes.
It's not going to be too crazy of him to adjust to what Carolina has talent wise. We've got Christian McCaffrey, assuming health is okay there. He's going to be able to be on the field with him a lot. That'll open up play action. That'll open up a lot of things with the run game that Baker's familiar with. So yeah, I mean, all things considered, it's not going to be the hardest transition.
Absolutely, yeah, because there were these games where like Baker really was able to put out well as far as stats are concerned. In some games, he was like below like 250 or even like 200 passing yards, and he just didn't need to because the
Right.
Browns had a solid defense there for a minute. Chubb and Kareem Hunt, like, why do you need to air the ball out to Beckham and Landry if you can win the games other ways? You know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
but either way, I think you nailed it. I think the team is still going to go through CMC with the passes, because I heard he is going to catch passes this year. A
Yeah.
very reliable
Yeah.
source did cue me in on that. So
Yeah, I believe
for
that was the
sure.
Gazette. I believe the Fantasy Gazette said they had a
Oh,
report that the
perfect.
Panthers were planning to throw him the ball a little bit. So I trust them. Hope you do too.
Excellent, excellent. It's so funny. All right, so that's awesome. So obviously,
Yeah.
free agency is just one way to build a roster, but they also are able to do so with the NFL draft, of course. So just going to recap some of the most notable picks here. Then we can touch on the draft class for just a bit. So first round, sixth overall, they took
Yep.
the top tackle in the class with Ike Ekwonu. I have sort of started it's not real, but a little figurative. It's not a swear jar, but it's like a jar
Okay.
every time I mispronounce a player's
Oh.
name. So Ekwonu, I'm hoping I'm saying it right twice now, has contributed to that fake jar that I have. So he as well. And then in round three, 98th overall, they selected quarterback Matt Corral. Round four, 120th overall, linebacker Brandon Smith out of Penn State, which is usually known as linebacker U. So always good to get a linebacker or a defensive player out of there, but I may be a little bit biased. I don't know. Then they, of course, they finished their draft off with an edge rusher, offensive guard, and a quarterback. Very interesting though, because again, this happened before the Baker Mayfield signing, and adding a top tackle in the class is a great foundational piece, right? Now in April, the big question of the NFL draft is like, where are these quarterbacks going to go, right?
Oh, of
Like
course. Yeah.
Malik Willis, Kenny Pickett, all the mock drafts were like all over the place. Some are more legitimate, some are more clickbaity, but it's like you just never know until you see the thing, right? Just fun to kind of play around with those things. Where were you at when the Panthers were sitting at six? Were you hoping for a tackle? Were you thinking maybe Willis or Pickett would be a good idea? And again, it doesn't matter anymore because now you have
Right.
Baker and stuff. But where were you at during that time?
Yeah. I mean, anytime that your team is sitting there and you've got a top 10 pick, you're really hoping for a splash at quarterback or wide receiver or just a really exciting position. I wasn't too thrilled with anyone in this quarterback class.
Okay.
Uh, Pickett, Corral, Willis. I'm forgetting a couple names as I'm kind of cycling through here that I know were, they were decent options, but Ritter,
Ritter and
Ritter,
Howell. Yeah, so some people like
Howell,
Howell a
yeah.
lot. Yeah.
And I'm of the theory that with the NFL draft, if you have a quarterback that you love, you're crazy about, and talent wise, other people's opinions, it's not just you that loves him. If everyone's saying, this guy is legit, take that guy in the top 10, top 5, number 1, wherever you've got him. But other than that, I mean, you go back previous draft classes, it can be so easy to mess up those splash plays if you go wide receiver or quarterback. It can be easy to not find the right one, and now you're just resetting yourself another year or two down the road.
Yep.
So we had Darnold. I thought Darnold was fine. I don't think, it's not like you draft Kenny Pickett and he comes in and he's going to get you 7 more wins than Sam Darnold's going to get you. I'm not sure that's him. If that's him, great, but it's not set that way right now. So take the positions that work for football success. That to me is what shows that Matt Rule and the rest of the front office is kind of committed to shifting towards success. I mean, even going back to earlier, you mentioned the free agent signings. Where'd they come from? They came from the Rams. They came from the Ravens. Baker was with Cleveland, but successful organizations. Then you look at the draft. They took tackle, quarterback, linebacker. Late rounds was edge, guard, and a corner. Those are like what everyone who's smart about football, that's the positions that helps you win. So that's what excites me about the turnaround and the rebuild. The whole process of it is that you're going after what works traditionally for football. So I'm not going to sit here and lie to you and say that I had, offensive tackle rankings in my back pocket and I'm yelling at the TV for one of them over the other. But I like that we went offensive tackle. We went with an aggressive one. We went with one that kind of fits with what we're trying to do. So I'm never against grabbing a position that works for football success, and that's what Iquanwu at that pick represented.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and I'm the same way. Like I,
Yep.
I watch a little bit of college football. I went to Penn State. I'm a big Penn State fan. I don't even get to watch every single Penn State game just because we're just busy on the weekend. Well, kids, you'll figure that out. But yeah. So like I'm not this like film grinder type or whatever. But just from
Sure.
a typical team building standpoint, I think you have the right perspective. So like it's not the sexiest pick, right? But it is like
Sure.
a wise pick.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think it was kind of like a coin flip anyway. It seemed like some of the draft analysts were kind of like, well, some liked Evan Neal, some liked Ekwonu a little bit better. So I'm like, look, well, one or the other, that's definitely a position to help your team in the long run. So I gotcha. So that's cool.
Yeah.
Now, excuse me. Another thing that was interesting about Matt Corral is that I think one of the reasons why he wasn't as highly regarded in the draft process was because of like the late season injury that he
Sure.
sustained because he
That's
broke
always
his
going to scare
ankle.
some teams away.
That's right. So I think maybe some of the other quarterback prospects maybe got a slight bump up because he went down a little bit. I just really liked his like athletic tools. He's really good with like rushing, playing in the top competition in
Yeah.
college football in the SEC. Maybe a little like sporadic in his throwing or whatever. It wasn't always super consistent, but still like the physical tools were there. And I think just unfortunately with that late season ankle injury, that may have kind of scared some teams off. So I think it was a great pick by the Panthers in the context of when they were choosing, at that spot. I think maybe the only other quarterback that may have been drafted like around that range could have been Sam Howell, but I
Mm-hmm.
continue to say that I think Washington got an absolute steal with him at the top of the fifth round. I
I'd
just
say so.
couldn't believe like just the fall and the fall and the fall of him. But I don't know. I think maybe Willis got a little bit of a bump up from like the draft buzz, people, because of that. But I think he's going to be an excellent back, like a backup option, just a guy to have in the little in the chamber. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I thought that was a really good pick. Um, Yeah, so you touched on it, and I agree that I think it's very wise and it's very smart of them to prioritize the offensive line the way they did in free agency and in the draft to just overall keep that team build in the proper trajectory. And I like how you brought up that they got players from good teams. They're not getting like okay players from bad teams. That they're getting good players from good teams that just couldn't retain those players. You know what I mean?
Sure.
So
Yeah.
I'm with you. I'm definitely with you there. Um, but so it's a very interesting situation. I think through the draft and through free agency, they built that they continue to build this very exciting young core of players on both sides of the field. And I do think that perhaps Baker can take them to that next level. And then again, the next level would be, you know, 8 wins or whatever, because it's been like 5 wins, 5 wins, I think 7 wins, and then I think 4 years ago they had an 11-win season. But either way, I think it's been a while since they've gotten double-digit wins. But either way, taking us to this year,
Yep.
reviewing the schedule that they have in front of them. What do you think is a realistic win-loss record for the Panthers? I almost said the Browns because they played them
Yeah.
in week 1, but for the Panthers.
Oh, that's going to be a great game, man. I wish so badly that game was in Cleveland. I've never wanted a hurricane to happen, but like if just like enough of one, not that's like in danger to people, but enough to like
Right.
cover the stadium for week one, if that could just happen, that'd be great. Again, no
Oh
people in
my
danger,
gosh.
but just a
Oh yeah,
hurricane
yeah.
right over the stadium. So we got to go play it in Cleveland. Yeah. So for the sake of the show, I went through the schedule just to kind of glance and see what I got. I'll give you kind of the wide lens of it. So coming off back-to-back seasons of 5 wins, and we really want improvement. The whole team's begging for improvement. I went down and I looked at our schedule and I counted, and I think we're going to go 5-12.
Gotcha.
I think we are. So I'm looking at the schedule here in front of me, and I kind of grouped those first 3 games together. I think we can actually have another solid start. If you look at those 3 games, it's at home against Cleveland.
Yep.
No Deshaun Watson, I think, and Baker plays. I think he's fired up enough. I feel like that's going to be a gimme game. I feel like they're going to get it.
I think Baker Mayfield week 1 in DFS is a lock. He's gonna go bananas.
They're gonna jack him up to like 10 or whatever the high amount is. I forget right now. $10,000, I think, on
Oh,
FanDuel
okay.
is like the high number. They're gonna jack him up to that. So the first 3 games, it's Cleveland, at the Giants, and then at home against the Saints. So 2 out of those 3 home games against beatable teams. I think that's a potential solid start there. Road game against the Giants, that doesn't threaten me. Home game against New Orleans. I feel like this happens all the time in divisions. Even when the team is way worse, they usually end up splitting. Well, maybe not way worse, but even if it's like a small to medium gap, they usually end up splitting.
No, I think it happens more often than people think. At least in the
Right.
NFC East, we played a game in New York, or I guess technically New Jersey, and the Eagles were just flat as flat could be. And I think only because it was the Giants, like for no other reason. But
Yep.
continue. Yeah,
Yep.
no, I'm with you.
So then is when it gets rough. So I could see a 2-1 start. Actually, I could.
I
Then
agree with that. Yep.
Then we've got a 4-week stretch where we are at home. So that's nice at home, but we're playing at home against Arizona, followed by San Francisco. Then we're on the road at the Rams, and then we got the Bucs at home. That's probably 0-4. I don't see that as a win. Now, we did get a surprise game against Arizona. We got a dub against Arizona last year. So maybe we have their number and maybe we get that one. I don't know. Then it's at Atlanta, at Cincy. Those are probably losses. Home against Atlanta, I'll give the win there. At Baltimore, and then at home against Denver, probably also losses. Got the Week 13 bye, and then there's a grouping of 3 games that I like. We're at Seattle, got the Steelers at home, and then Detroit at home. So potential room for a post-bye energy plus not too great of teams. I could see another win or 2 being picked up in the Seattle, Pittsburgh, Detroit section. Last 2 games are at Tampa and at New Orleans, and those will likely be losses. So I counted it at about 5-12. Best case scenario, that maybe shifts up to 7. Worst case scenario, probably only winning 3-4 games. So there's some groupings of games that I like, but the divisions that we drew the NFC West. So we're playing all 4 of those teams, and we're playing the AFC North, all 4 of those teams. Outside of assuming Brissett in Cleveland, that's Baltimore, Cincy, Pittsburgh, traditionally very good teams. NFC West, Niners, Rams, 49ers. I don't see those being wins, and maybe we catch Seattle on the road after the bye. So the schedule doesn't line up too easily this year. It doesn't inspire too much confidence in me. So that makes me a little worried that, Matt Rule being on the hot seat might be affected by a pretty difficult lineup of games. But there's some things that are exciting. Like I like when you can start the season off hot, and I like when you can get going after a bye week, and the schedule lines up for that a little bit. But yeah, not too confident by looking at that, but it's the NFL. Who knows?
Yeah, so I just want to mention something. I appreciate your demeanor in all this, because it's always interesting talking to fans,
Yeah.
because sometimes they can be way optimistic, way pessimistic. You just seem like you just have your head on straight and you just understand what football's all about. You know what I mean?
Right.
So I think like with that Arizona game, they won't have DeAndre Hopkins back yet. So that always helps. You know what I mean?
That's $1 in the jar up there, Steve.
That's
That
right. Oh,
counts.
yeah, that that
That's a
that
spoonerism. That counts.
that's right. Yeah, yeah, yeah. So, oh my gosh, the freaking jar. Yeah, so no, I mean, I've had some fans on, and they're just like the Chicago Bears episode I had. They're just like, we're just sad Bears fans, but they're excited for Justin Fields, but they're just are
Yeah.
anticipating more pain. At least for another year or two, once they actually add, like a skill position player who's not 25 or older. But either way, so I like
Don't even
that.
have to know. Don't even have to name him to know who you're talking about.
That's right. Yeah. But I think well, what I appreciate is that you are optimistic, but you also are realistic, and I
Sure.
think that just really goes a long way in just the season long expectations and just general like tilting and enjoyment, because if your expectations are really high and the team just doesn't do well, then it's just a miserable long season, but if you
Yeah.
have kind of lower expectations and you can see that there's reason to be excited, well, that just makes the whole experience of being a fan just all the more enjoyable,
Yeah.
so I do like how you are approaching it, looking at all that. So I think that's cool. I think that's healthy, in other words.
Yeah.
So that's
Now,
good.
what's that old saying? If you have low expectations, you'll never be disappointed.
That's right.
So that's probably years of Panthers fandom pain, where I
Yeah.
thought each year with Cam was going to be 13-3 and another Super Bowl appearance, another deep playoff run, and every other year that was kind of a disappointment. So maybe that's that speaking a little bit, but I'm encouraged by the young defense. If you can keep another team's point totals down, you can surprise and you can win a bunch of games, or you can at least keep them close. I mean, ask Detroit last year. They didn't win a lot of games, but they played hard. Their defense played hard. They were in a lot of close games. They only won like 3 games, but that could be the recipe. You keep a lot of those games close, offense dives into the end zone a little bit more, and you might catch a couple of teams.
but
So,
but it's but it's also
yeah, hoping
not
I'm wrong.
like, oh yes, and it's also not a locker room that is like feeling defeated. You know what I mean?
Yeah,
Like that whole team was very supportive of Dan Campbell, and everything else. So
absolutely.
I think you're right. Like coaches can absolutely lose a locker room if just like the vibe is off. Like Joe Judge, for
Yeah,
example, of the Giants, like they couldn't wait to just like get him out of town. He just was like a nightmare. And just what they were seeing on the field wasn't good either. It just was like a nasty kind of situation there. But you're right. If you can, and again, I think McCaffrey is just like the key to it all. If the defense can do their part, kind of keep teams to like 20, 21 points or in that range,
yeah,
I can very easily see the Panthers averaging, 24 points a game, or McCaffrey can kind of control the clock, like because of those short passes are basically like running plays, if you will, because they're high
yeah.
completion and stuff. So yeah, I didn't think I would be as excited for the Panthers this season until I started to see what was on their roster fully. It's like we have to go through this process of figuring out like who we're excited for like fantasy purposes, right? But then when you look at the whole scope of the team, it is a very intriguing team to watch. So I for sure am looking forward to it. But I do think 5 wins is probably reasonable.
Sure.
Um, did you have any idea like what like the over under like win total is for them? I meant to look that up ahead of time. I wasn't
Oh
sure.
yeah, I'm not sure what Vegas has it at.
Yeah.
It's probably in the 5 to 6 range, I would
Right.
imagine.
Yeah. Probably like
I
five and a half.
Baker might have given him another half
Oh,
win
sure.
in that,
Sure.
maybe a full win. I don't know. We'll look that up. We'll talk about that. We'll talk
Yeah,
about
for
that
sure.
after the show. So I'm curious now.
Now, when Cam Newton was the quarterback, they had, I think, 3 or 4 straight years of division titles, or they at least made the playoffs. So
3 straight.
how 3 straight? Okay.
Yep.
Um, how soon do you think they could compete for the NFC South division? Because my last episode was with the Atlanta Falcons, so I had a couple guests on talking about the Falcons, and they
Yep.
had at least a 2-year window from when they could even like entertain the idea, right?
Yeah.
So with the Bucks having like maybe like one last great season here with Brady. A lot of their star players are on like the older side. Like a lot of their defense, except for like Devin White, a lot of their like defensive talent is on the older side. Um,
Yep.
and then like Mike Evans, he's a stud, but he's still in his prime. But either way,
Yeah.
once
28. Yeah.
Brady's, but you take Brady away from that team, which could very easily be next year, he could be gone. I mean, they just are not a contender unless they bring in like a veteran like quarterback, right? How soon
Yep.
do you think? And with the Saints, like they're kind of an interesting case. Like no more Drew Brees. They have Jameis, who's a lot of fun, but like a little erratic, in
Yeah.
his
He's good for
play,
memes.
Oh my gosh, he's just gold. Yeah.
Yeah.
Like, and then with the Falcons just clearly in a big rebuild, I would argue that the Panthers have a leg up on the rebuild side of things, just with,
Yeah.
how far away do you think the Panthers are from being a contender to win the NFC South?
Well, it's next season. It's the 2023-24 season. I know for a fact that every NFC South team is going to be saying that, because there's a giant elephant in the room of the division. It's Tom Brady.
Right.
As long as he's throwing the ball, he's going to win the division title. As long as Atlanta's this bad, as long as Carolina is teeter-totter in that line, New Orleans isn't going to pose too much of a threat. I could see him, winning a game against him, of course. They've played very well against Tampa Tom in the last couple of years. So everyone's going to be gunning for that NFC South title next year. I think the Tampa Bay defense is still a little weakened after how good they were for that Super Bowl run. Their secondary last year was Swiss cheese. You could score on Tampa. You couldn't run
Right.
on Tampa, but you could score on Tampa. So after Tom leaves, assuming they don't, just crush in the draft and land an amazing quarterback. I'm trying to think of who even is a free agent next year for them to get. I would assume a down year from them. If we can keep together our defensive core in Carolina next year, Baker plays well, and that sets maybe him up for another year. Maybe we sign him for a 1 to 2 year deal after this one. Don't think he earns his way to a 4-year contract or anything like that. I think he maybe buys himself another year or two. Maybe Corral's amazing. Maybe Carolina gets another guy in the draft next year, but it's definitely 2023. The next time they can contend it, because as long as Tom is still playing there, it's theirs.
Yeah, I did structure the question that way because I think with the added wild card spots, I just think like the
Oh,
NFC
sure.
West, I think like the NFC West are just going to own those spots, or potentially like whoever's at the, because like the NFC East is like a rotation, right? Um,
Yeah, there's
it,
always two teams in there that should be good, and then like only one kind of is. I don't know how
right.
that always works.
And the same thing is like with like with like the North Division. Like once Rogers gone, it's just kind of like open season as far as I'm
Yeah,
concerned. And the Vikings like should be better than what they
yeah.
actually are, and things like this. But
If they can control
uh,
those one-score games, I think you give them one of those wild card spots this year,
right,
and then give the rest to the NFC West. Maybe New Orleans this year. I know that they played pretty admirably last year. Added Tyrann Matthew, so I wouldn't count out New Orleans quite yet. But it's gonna be like them, Minnesota, or the Niners, and they're all going to be like within a game of each other, I would imagine.
yeah, I'll have a couple Saints fans on a little bit later this week, so that'll be another fascinating discussion to get like another perspective on that, because I was very surprised at the aggressiveness of their offseason trading, because they
Oh
actually
yeah,
did like a pre NFL draft trade with the Eagles to get another first rounder, and they gave up a 2023 first and some other, and a 2024 second to the Eagles to get like another first this year.
yep,
And then they used that pick to move up to get Chris Olave, who I really like a lot. I
yeah,
just
he's
don't
good.
know. I don't know if they're just one Chris Olave away from being a contender. And it seems like the moves they were making, I just think their ceiling is that wild card spot, so
Sure,
I'm very
yep,
excited to see what they have. I'm very interested to see what they have to say about that. But I just think Jameis is just a little too fickle to really be like relied upon. Um, but either way, I just think it's a very
yeah.
interesting division, in other words. But
Yeah, and
yeah,
with New Orleans next year, what's going to be interesting is everything I'm hearing regarding the Alvin Kamara case is that likely a suspension will be coming next season. So what New Orleans has working for them
Oh,
is if they can control tempo. Jameis had like that 140-yard, 5-touchdown game last season. You remember that one? Like if so, that can be kind of their recipe. They don't need Jameis slinging it everywhere, throwing a bunch of ints. They don't need that. But if that Kamara case hits them hard next year, then it could be open. No Tom next year, then I could see Carolina making a solid push next season. So
there
we'll
you
see
go.
who is still around from this year. Well, we'll see if it's Matt Rule. We'll see if it's someone else. But yeah, definitely 2023.
I like that. I like that. Okay, so we do want to make this show about
Yeah,
fantasy football as well.
yeah.
I do like the regular football talk, but we always want to shift it over to the fantasy realm.
Let's do
So
it.
I'm just curious about for the Panthers specifically, offensive players that you'll be targeting at the projected cost for either dynasty or redraft. I know you're a big dynasty player, so you can take it whichever direction. But who are some offensive players on the Panthers who you're targeting at cost?
Yeah, well, luckily I've already got a lot of DJ Moore in terms of
Perfect.
dynasty. You don't need me to keep saying, go acquire him, go acquire DJ Moore. He's an incredible talent, incredibly athletic. He should command a significant amount of the targets from Baker. I know Baker had issues, keeping his number ones happy in the past, and then their dads go and make videos. So I don't think DJ Moore's dad knows how to run iMovie quite yet. So don't think that's going to be too much of an issue. Sorry. Yeah, so obviously DJ Moore's a buy. Kind of a fun one in there. Robbie Anderson, he had that moment where it was like, he commented negatively on a potential post like back in the spring. Hey, Baker might be coming to Carolina. Robbie comments no on it. If you're in Dynasty and someone's panicking about Robbie Anderson and you can give him a mid to late third or even a fourth to someone that's going to panic about that, you could probably toss him that way and go get Robbie for pretty cheap. Terrace Marshall Jr., I know he just didn't look good, didn't play a lot. I know you're excited about him. I've heard you talk about Terrace Marshall. The draft capital's there. He's got decent size. He could be someone you could acquire late. Like I've got Terrace Marshall in a dynasty league, and I've been shipping him cheap, so I know he can be had from the right owner. So maybe that's a guy you get cheap because if you're just throwing a third or fourth in there, that's a dart throw anyway, and you're probably not getting a second round wide receiver draft capital anyway. I know a lot of people will tell you that's good advice because of how hard he face planted, but you never know. You never know with anybody. So I like Terrace at cost in dynasty. Yeah, DJ Moore, I'm definitely scooping up in redraft. I have a ton of him in best ball. If you can get him in like the early fourth, I know he's going in kind of the late third, early fourth. So it's a good spot
Okay.
for DJ Moore. Baker, Baker's been in a run heavy offense in the past. He's had big games every now and then. I don't really know what Carolina's planning to do with him, but I know that as long as they have Christian McCaffrey, the plan will be to run through McCaffrey. So Baker, I'm treating as a low-end QB2. I'm treating him as a successful NFL quarterback who, stat-wise, because it's fantasy and this is about stats, not all leagues reward being efficient. I'm treating Baker as a low-end QB2. I would not draft him in a 1 QB league. If you're playing in a typical redraft, I'm not drafting him. I'll draft DJ Moore. I'll grab McCaffrey if I've got like a top 5 pick and someone lets that happen. I'll grab those guys. And, going on to McCaffrey, I almost said McPanicking. I'm not panicking on Christian McCaffrey quite yet. The injuries, I know they've piled up, but they have not been catastrophic. It's not the craziest thing in the world for a guy to miss a lot of games and come back and be successful for another couple of years. I mean, look at Dalvin Cook, missed, I think all of his rookie year, if not more than I think he missed all but 2 games with the ACL tear and then missed a bunch of games in his second year. And now no one questions if Dalvin Cook's, an injury risk anymore, but he's missed, I think, just as many games as McCaffrey, if not more. So I'm not panicking there on McCaffrey. I'd only take JT, Derrick Henry. If you're an Eckler guy, you could take Eckler over McCaffrey, but I'm still taking him top 5. I'm sure you're the same. You could probably treat the defense as a streamer. Go in and look at their games. I mean, you go back to those first three. You've got Cleveland at home. You're going to Daniel Jones, who's a turnover machine, second week, and then you've got the Saints at home against Jameis. You could treat the Panthers as a streamer, and if you just need like a late round defense, if you're waiting until the very end and then all the good ones are gone, you could take Carolina and start off for about 3 weeks there and be okay and buy yourself some time. So treat the defense like a streamer for sure this year in redraft. I believe that's all the options that I like. I don't know. I know some people think Dante Foreman is going to be the handcuff there to McCaffrey. But going back to the 2020 draft, there was a story that came out that Matt Rule's wife called him during the draft and said, "Don't come home without Chuba Hubbard." They really like Chuba. He really likes Chuba. He coached against him when he was at Baylor. Chuba was at Oklahoma State. So I know there's a little bit of personal coaching preference there. So in terms of the backup, I lean Hubbard, even though Foreman's a little more accomplished. I just lean Hubbard based on the coaching. Could be wrong about that, but I like to find little tidbits like that. If a coach loves a guy, if he's got a weird reason, I like to buy that. So that's kind of a quick rundown. I'd love to hear some of your thoughts as well on some of those guys.
Yeah, if the coach knows what's good for him, he's going to listen to his wife. He's going to forget the film, forget the medicals, listen to the wife. No, but that really has been a big question I've been asking myself, especially with like Scott Fishbowl drafts going on. Like, who are these better handcuffs to grab later in the rounds, right? Both of them went earlier than I was comfortable taking them in my division. But either way, I was kind of leaning Hubbard, but there seems to be this like hive for Foreman, as of late, but that's a really interesting, like some teams are just easy, like Dalvin Cook, Madison, David Montgomery, Khalil Herbert, easy, right? But this one, it could be one or the other. So my answer is neither. I'll just like wait to grab one on waivers if they're there, and if not, the cost benefit just doesn't make sense to me. But that's very interesting. I think what Hubbard was able to show when he had a decent amount of volume wasn't horrible. And then sometimes it wasn't the best either. But I do agree that that the offense will run through McCaffrey, and I'm not really going to be panicking on McCaffrey either. He is definitely someone that I think can easily yield a top three running back season. I would not hesitate to take him at the top of drafts. I like the order you mentioned about JT, Derrick Henry, maybe Eckler, Christian McCaffrey. I think Christian McCaffrey just has such a high ceiling and such a low floor when he is healthy. You just really don't want to own yourself and avoid him. So yeah, and now as far as dynasty's concerned, I definitely liked your perspective on a lot of those players. One that I have been interested in was Terrace Marshall. I did a couple of startups this year, and you're able to get him as like your team's wide receiver 7, wide receiver 8. I am all about that with someone who has that draft capital with his size, and he had a phenomenal preseason last year. So I'm not particularly that worried, even though he was not great as a rookie. I think the cost benefit with him deep into startups as a deep bench wide receiver, uh, definitely a good lottery ticket to aim for. Then the next question was regarding offensive players to fade at the projected cost. I literally had none. Uh, I didn't have any players to fade at cost. I do think a lot of them are appropriately valued. Do you have any players that you are fading at cost, or are you pretty happy with their value overall?
Well, when your team kind of struggles, you don't have to worry about fading too many people at cost because not a lot of people are too expensive. So that's pretty helpful there. Yeah, no one's going really at a price that I have much of an issue with. Yeah, I mean, everyone's pretty cheap. Have you seen I mean, McCaffrey's a top, at worst, top 7 pick. Love where DJ Moore's going, but everyone else is going pretty late. Have you? I had to hop back on there after a technical issue. Did you have anybody that you were fading?
I had no one that I'm fading at cost.
Yeah,
The only player that I'm not like super excited, I guess, to draft would probably be Robbie Anderson, because I'm more on the Terrace Marshall side of things.
sure.
Um, what I had said was that in startups this offseason, I've gotten them in literally every single one as like my wide receiver 7. Like I'm totally
Yeah,
in on Marshall's upside at that cost. You know what I mean?
yeah. You can
If
get him
he
so late, so late.
right. So last year, if you took him like at the top of the second round in your rookie draft, like that just was a rough season to, and it just kind of put a bad taste in your mouth. But now this year, I think there is a tremendous buying opportunity.
Yeah,
If you're doing a startup, it's always is like within that context, right? I tried to send an offer to the guy who has Marshall. This was before the NFL draft. I sent him 2/3 for him,
yeah.
and he instantly rejected it and said, "Nope, I want a second." And I said, "Nope, I'm not willing to do that."
Mm, yeah.
So I thought like 2/3 was actually was pretty decent,
That's
and
good
that was
value.
it in my
Yeah.
like aggressive pursuit of wanting to buy in. So I was like, okay, I guess I just won't have him in this league. I'll just get him somewhere else because I have like what is it now? 16 dynasty leagues. It's a problem. But anyway, no, so
It's
I
all right, man. It's all right. I was getting that
the
startup itch earlier today, and I was like, hold off, hold off. You're not gonna add another one right now.
Yeah, the Scott Fishbowl draft. I mean, it's like I've never smoked a cigarette, but the feeling of needing a cigarette was there when I was done that draft. It was like, oh man, like really tough competition. Which is great. Like I really enjoy that. But it was like, man, every round, as soon as I start thinking about a player I want to get, they're gone 2 picks later. So some pretty sharp guys in there, but when to touch on Baker Mayfield,
Yep.
where you have him like as a back end quarterback too, not really draftable in single quarterback formats. I am with you 100%. He is to me like if you play in like a super flex league, if I happen to land Herbert, Allen, Mahomes, so
Yep.
somewhat of that, I am fine with him if I miss on like my favorite like QB2
Yeah.
options. I think he's fine as a QB2. Just like double up with like Baker and Davis Mills or whatever. You know what I mean? Like if I get
Yeah.
Herbert, Baker, and Mills, I'm happy there. So he is definitely is like a fallback option if I don't get like my favorite like QB2 targets or whatever.
Yeah.
Um
Yeah. I'm
so
with you there.
yeah,
He's
so
a good safe QB3 option in super flex if you can start your bench situation off with him or Mills. I love that. Yeah, things change in the NFL fast. Baker's guaranteed basically a starting job for a year.
yep.
That's pretty solid. I had a couple of dynasties where I had Darnold coming off my bench. I had acquired him cheap in one in a startup earlier this year. I took him in like the 19th round or something. And then I followed up by drafting Corral in the rookie draft. And I had a situation just like that happen in 2 leagues and didn't have Baker. So basically what I'm saying is with Carolina, you can get a lot of good guys at cost right now. And I had done
Absolutely.
that. It just wasn't Baker. So yeah, I like what you're saying. Those guys like him and Mills, that's a great bench quarterback to have in Superflex. He can fill in some bye weeks for you. And if they're playing a defense that's been decimated by injuries or he's going to need to throw a lot, he's definitely a guy you can plug and play for sure.
I do appreciate that you touched on the team defense. So that is always that
Yep.
has been an area I just have overlooked in these shows. But um, I'm not like a big DFS player. I know I just like made the joke about like Baker in like week 1,
Sure.
but I do think like you bring up a good point, like because of the talent and matchup specific, that they could be a very good cheap like defense option like in those in the FanDuels of the world or DraftKings of the world, so I'm
Absolutely.
definitely gonna keep an eye out for that if I do decide to, waste another $20 on the season. Um, because I never make money, so that's why I have
Right.
to limit it to a certain amount, that I even put in the first place. But the little self control there for sure. But yeah, so I think we nailed it. I think we have a very like I said, very healthy outlook on what the Panthers can be with very reasonable expectations. Again, a team that I am more excited for than I actually thought I would be. So I thank you for joining me and bringing on your perspective and wearing the Luke Kuechly jersey. Love to see
Yes,
that.
sir. Yes,
What a
sir.
phenomenal player! Oh my goodness.
He
Yeah,
was
he
great.
was so great.
He was great.
Yeah,
I always secretly hoped he'd come be our defensive coordinator because it was like having your defensive coordinator be your linebacker. I've always hoped he'd come back to a coaching role. He must not be ready yet because I know as soon as he wants that job, they'll give it to him.
perfect. Yeah, I love that. So yeah, so we're just gonna wrap it up here. So again, thank you for being on, and then please right now just share anything that you're putting out or have going on with you.
Yeah, well, in the fantasy football content space, myself and a good friend of mine, we run the Fantasy Gazette together. So if you like a little bit of satire and humor in your life, definitely go give us a follow. We're at Fantasy Gazette, and then we got an underscore at the end there. Someone else has Fantasy Gazette. They haven't tweeted in like 10 years. I've been trying to contact Twitter for it. We'll get it one day. But yeah, definitely follow us. We've been putting out some good stuff to help you win your drafts. Threads to dominate your draft, and then within those threads, we quote tweet our other threads, so you can go see those threads. It's all about the threads right now, so definitely hit us up, man. We're putting out some good content over there. So yeah, for sure, follow Fantasy Gazette with all your heart and
Oh
money.
my gosh, and the TikToks you guys have been putting out have been fantastic too. The big arm motions, I love it. Uh, yeah, it's personifying a very uh another pretty famous TikToker, but either way, it is great.
Multiple.
Multiple,
We're
yeah.
not going after anybody with these. We try never to make our satire be like a target. We're not like
Oh
trying to
no,
hurt
sure.
somebody with it. But no, there's a couple guys out there that I just see them and I'm like, it's a really interesting way to present this. Let's make it funny.
But I just look at it like Weird Al, right? So like
Oh yeah,
he'll tackle a genre, he'll tackle like the sound of like Pearl Jam for a song or something. So in a lot of ways it is flattering, but also just kind of putting your own little like absurd like twist on it. So I think it's great. But yeah, I can't recommend Fantasy Gazette enough. Really hilarious, just a great way to break up the social media experience, and even much more on the website. It's just phenomenal. So I can't stop talking about how much I love it. But either way, Josiah, thank you so much for coming on. Best of luck to you with your family, with your Panthers, and with your fantasy teams this season. Thanks again for coming on.
for sure, Steve. Glad to be here. Good luck with all you're doing, man. We'll talk soon.
All right, you got it.
See
Have a
ya.
good one.